everyone, and welcome to Loggerhead Marinelife Center's virtual coastal classroom for today. Today we're going to be talking all about fish identification, but we'll give everyone just a second to tune in. In the meantime, enjoy our fish in the nearshore tank. All right, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Like I mentioned, today we're going to be talking all about fish identification. Now, fish ID is what I'll shorten it as, is really important, especially for scientists. We're continuing to discover new fish almost every single day because if you think about it, the ocean covers a lot of our planet. It covers about 70% of the surface of the Earth. So that is a lot of surface area, and with that, there is always new things to discover. There's depths that we can't even reach as the human, and trying to figure out what these fish look like and try to compare them to other fish that we already know is super important. So when we look at fish in general, there are really three classes. So if you tuned into a previous virtual coastal classroom, that's a tongue tire, you might have learned a little bit about animal classification. So when we look at the animal classification, animals in the animal kingdom, they can be separated into a couple of different areas. The ones that we talked about were all vertebrates, which means that they have some type of backbone in their body. And then from there, there are really kind of four main kingdoms that we look at, or phylas really is what they're called in the taxonomic world. We have our fish is the one that we'll talk about today. There's amphibians, reptiles, birds, and mammals. So there's actually five that we really kind of consider under those bigger phylas. And with the fish, they're actually broken down into three classes. So the three classes are your agnathas, which are your like lampreys and hagfish. They're really weird and kind of drastic looking. If you've ever looked up a picture, they have a very circular mouth and have lots of little teeth. We have your chondrichthyes, which if you tune in to another virtual coastal classroom that we'll have, we have one of our educators talking about them and elasmobranchs. And then the ones that we're focusing on today are our fish. So we're looking at our osteichthyes. So those are all the Latin names of them. They can be pretty tough to pronounce sometimes. But our osteichthyes is our largest class of our fish. And when we look at them, there's over 27,000 species within that class. So that's a lot of fish that we see in that class. And we're going to play a quick game to figure out the animals that live in the ocean. Some of you might not realize that they're actually considered fish. And once we play this game, we'll go into what really the characteristics of a fish are. So I have a couple of pictures, and we're going to go through them, and I want you to type in if you think it is a fish or if it's fishy, which means it's not a fish. So this is our first one. Go ahead and type in below if you think it is a fish or if it is fishy. So if you typed in below that this is a fish, you are absolutely correct. This is a juvenile blackfin snapper. The next one we'll go into. What do we think? Fish or fishy? If you typed in fish again, You're absolutely correct. This is going to be our hogfish. A little different than what we think of our normal fish looking like with those extra dorsal fins that we saw. Now what about this one? What do we think? Fish or fishy? This one might be a little tricky. So this is a cushion sea star, and this is going to be fishy. So not a fish. It is under a completely different phyla. It's under our echinoderms, which goes into our sea urchins, our sea cucumbers, and things along those lines when it comes to those animals. Now what about this one? Fish or fishy? This one is a horseshoe crab. Some of you up north, I know I've definitely seen them around in Maryland when I was up there, might have seen these. These are fishy. So they are not a fish. They are actually an arthropod and more related to scorpions and spiders than they actually are crabs, which is a fun fact about them. Now, this one, we have a couple more. Fish or fishy? This one's a little tricky. If you said fish, you're absolutely correct. So this is a nurse shark, and the nurse sharks are actually under the class Chondrichthyes. So they are considered a fish technically. Now what do we think about this one right here? Again, another tricky one. So this is an octopus. And if you said fishy, you are correct. So this is actually under the class the class Mollusca. So you're looking at your cephalopods, which are your squids, your octopus, and your chambered nautilus. Had to think about that one for a second. And then also your oysters and clams. And then this is our last one, fish or fishy. This is going to be a spotted eagle ray. They're pretty common here in Florida. I love seeing them when I go out onto the water. So this is also a fish, surprisingly. It is also under that order or the class Chondrichthyes, relating to the sharks and rays, and your skates as well. So when you looked at all those pictures, you can see that fish can come in a wide and kind of various sizes, different characteristics. And how are you going to look at just the one class? Remember, we're focusing on just one. We're focusing on our Osteichthyes. So our bony fish is what that classifies as. How are you going to tell all 27,000 species apart? What are you going to look for? Anybody want to take a guess as to what scientists may look for when we're trying to identify all of these different fish? So with our kind of identification process, when we ID things, we're looking for physical characteristics. Those tend to be the easiest things that we look for. We can also look for coloration and the habitat that they live in. So when we look, we see that this is my fish model right here. There's a couple of physical characteristics that we're going to look for. So fins are really important. A fin lets us know kind of in the area that it is different types of fins. So these up here are your dorsal fins. This is going to be your primary and secondary dorsal. Not all species of fish have a secondary. Most of them do have a primary though. So your top fin or your dorsal fin, you have your pelvic fin down here at the bottom, your anal fin in the back, and then your caudal fin right here towards the end, or your tail, right? And there is, unfortunately, my model doesn't have it, but there are also your pectoral fins that form right here on the sides. Another thing that all fish species have is called an operculum. So that is this covering actually that's right here over the gills. And if I flip my model around, these are the actual gills themselves. So this is how fish are going to end up breathing. You also have this white spot right here that has little red dots in it. This is their backbone or their vertebra. So remember, They are bony fish, which means they have bones just like we do. They're just kind of structured a little bit differently. Another characteristic that a fish has in the Osteichthyes class is an air bladder. So this is how they're going to regulate their buoyancy while they're in the water column. Another thing that they have, most of them at least, there's always exceptions to our rules, are our scales. So fish are covered in scales. They have a sliminess to them, and this is a protective coat for them to make sure that they're not getting injured or anything like that when they're out of the water. That's how they're able to protect themselves. So this is what we look like with our fish model, and those are the main characteristics that we're looking for. Our caudal fin definitely helps with propulsion. So that's how these fish are going to move through the water while they are swimming. Their pectoral fins really help with steering. So they can put their fins out one way or another. If you think about a sea turtle actually uses its back flippers to steer and its front flippers to move forward, so that propulsion. Trying to reduce the amount of drag or increase the amount of drag depending on what they need while they're swimming through the ocean. And then your bottom, your pelvic, and your anal fin also kind of help with those types of things. Now, there are many different types of shapes that can come with our dorsal. Like I said before, the dorsal, there can be just one, there can be two. They can have, if we remember the hogfish picture that I showed, they can have a really funky kind of dorsal fin up there in the front. Same thing with our caudal fin. You can have forked, you can have tunic, you can have kind of a crescent shaped. And you can see with some of the fish behind me that they all also kind of have different characteristics, those physical characteristics that we're looking at. So what we're going to actually do is we're going to take a closer look at some of the fish in here, and I'm going to help you guys identify them while they're in our tank. So we'll go ahead and take a closer look and see the fish that are in the tank here. So if you guys look a little closely, you can see that there are some fish that actually have similar characteristics and others that don't. So I'll let you know that there's 6 fish total in here, but 4 of the 6 fish are actually from the same genus. So they fall under the same category of fish. When we look at their Latin names, a Latin name normally goes by genus and then species of fish. That is the kind of the lowest categorization that you can get when you're looking at any type of organism out there. So we'll look at this one right here because he's staying nice and still. So this is, until he moves. So this is a grunt, and with the grunts, there are 4 of them in here. So this is a blue striped grunt that I just pointed out originally. This one right here is a white grunt. Can get very confused with the blue striped grunt because it does have those blue lines right in front of its face. We also have the one all the way in the back with that yellow fin coming up front here. That's the Spanish grunt. And then this smaller one right here that doesn't look like the rest of them is called a tomtate.
Why are they called grunts?
That is a great question. So they get their name grunt because of they use their throat to actually make a pig-like noise. So if anybody has ever caught a grunt before, you might have heard them making this noise. So that's really the characteristic that actually defines them apart, is the sound that they make. Now that's not a physical characteristic, but remember, scientists can use other types of kind of identifiers to ID these fish. So they can use the habitat that they live in, they can use the food that they eat, their mouth shape. Another very distinctive characteristic of the grunt, and unfortunately I can't show you because I can't handle these fish, is actually the red in their mouth. So grunts are known to have very pigmented mouths that look red. And this is really almost a defensive kind of reaction that they have to protect themselves, to protect the territories that they live in. So that is another defining characteristic of them. So those are our grunts. You can look at all of them. They all have these, our pectoral fins down here, or our pelvic fins, sorry. Their pelvic fins all look very similar. Their caudal fin is very much kind of fork shaped. And then they have a dorsal fin, and the top part actually lays down flat. while that back part towards the caudal fin actually sticks up. And that's a very common characteristic that we have with our grunts.
And we had a question earlier, can dolphins have dorsal fins even though they're mammals?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's a great question. So although dolphins are mammals, they can share some of the similar characteristics as fish do, but they are mammals, right? So those dorsal fins help them either reduce drag or propel themselves through the water. Very similar. Yeah, great question. We're going to try to keep our eye on this kind of slender looking fish back here that's right above the coral reef. He's coming up. He has a funky head. He's very slender. Almost really doesn't have a dorsal or an anal fin. And this is actually very common for a wrasse. So you can see that it sticks up a little bit, not too much, those anal fins and that dorsal fin. This is a blue-headed wrasse. Now, wrasses are known for this very slender shape that they have. They're very elongated. They have these teeth that actually kind of stick out of the front of the lips. Some of them do. Those are all very common characteristics that we see when we look at wrasses. And then the last one that I have in here, now I have to find him. Oh, here he is. He's actually eating. This darker looking fish that's now hiding is the dusky damselfish. So damselfish, some of you might have heard of them before. They are pretty territorial when it comes to their areas. He's all the way over here in the corner now, trying to hide from us. So they're pretty territorial when it comes to their spaces for the most part. That's a common kind of behavioral characteristic that we see, something else scientists might use. They have this really high oval shape of their body. If you look at the back part of it, it's going to be a little hard to see, but they do have actually 2 anal spines, which allows for us to really try to identify them when we look at the species itself. These guys can come in all different colors. This one obviously comes in a darker shade. We have some more here that are almost like a silvery green color that we look at when we see them. All right, well, I'll go ahead and take a couple of questions. I'm gonna actually show you guys a little bit of a surprise, and you'll actually get to see the fish being fed right behind me while we go ahead and take some of these questions.
So what are those things with the holes in them? Are they artificial reef rocks?
Yeah.
Or blocks?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. So you might have seen the damselfish kind of interacting with them right behind me when we were showing you. Those are kind of artificial rock structures. So those artificial rock structures can be found in your aquariums at home. We use them because it provides shelter for animals, especially these fish. Some fish really like to be secured in kind of holes and crevices when they're out in the reefs. So really it helps us mimic those types of habitats that we can't physically take out of the wild. That was a great question. You can see that he went ahead, one of our ops guys went ahead and dropped some fish in there. We tend to feed them a variety of different things when we feed our fish. A lot of it is this krill that you see floating up here at the top. It can be, there's blocks of food that have a mix of algae and vitamins that our fish might need. Sometimes bloodworms can be mixed in there, or even smaller pieces of other fish you're looking at, like your sardines and your smaller species of fish. If you guys had any other questions, you can go ahead and keep typing them in. I'd be more than happy to answer them as you guys are watching the fish being fed. They're definitely pretty hungry if you guys saw them. If you guys have any questions, keep typing them in. We'll try to answer them as best as possible. I'm no ichthyologist, but I'll do what I can. Thank you guys for tuning in, and hopefully we'll see you next time.